there, you're listening to the Oklahoma On Stage podcast. Here we sit down with the folks that make the magic happen on and off stage in the Oklahoma theater scene. We're glad you joined us. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And our website is oklahomaonstage.org. If you have any comments or questions, you can send them to us at oklahomaonstage@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please leave us a rating and review and share with those you know. Let's not waste any more time, shall we? Grab a snack and a drink and take your seat. The show is about to begin.
Welcome back, everybody, to Oklahoma On Stage. As always, I'm Tim. I'm your host. Today, we're talking with an artist who has carved out one of the most eclectic, fearless, and delightfully unpredictable careers in Oklahoma theater. He's an actor, playwright, cabaret performer, and Fringe festival troublemaker whose work spans regional stages, off Broadway, and wonderfully chaotic world of Theatre Crude's Fringe Festival. You might have seen him in Newsies, Mother Road, Frost Nixon, The Odd Couple, The Rocky Horror Show, or Christmas Carol at Lyric Theater. You might have caught him in Schoolhouse Rock live at Oklahoma Children's Theater, or The Divine Sister at the Boom, or Merry Wives of Windsor at Oklahoma Shakespeare. And if you've ever been to a Theatre Crude event, you might have seen him doing something bold, weird, hilarious, and profound, sometimes all at once. Today, we're going to dive into his journey and the creative engine that keeps him making theater that refuses to sit still. Oklahoma On Stage family, please join me in welcoming Rodney Brazil to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Tim. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm glad that you're here. Like I said, this has been a long time coming, so I'm glad we're doing it. So as we do with everybody, it just kind of seems silly not to. We're doing a theater podcast, so we got to ask the question, how did you get started in theater?
That's a great question. So I got started in theater in the third grade in a school show. It was sort of a 1950s take on a Christmas show in the third grade. And I played Santa Clausarelli, which was like a Fonzie sort of Santa Claus. And I can't really remember the plot, but I had like a leather jacket and they had a red motorcycle helmet with the white ball on the top.
Nice.
And I really just, the choir teacher cast me, and I really had a good time. And then the very next year, there was a community theater in my hometown, Hobart, Oklahoma, that is a very prolific community theater and has been there a very long time. And it just so happened that the next year, they took us all to see Annie during the day at school. And I just couldn't believe it. I never really even knew that there were plays like that anywhere, much less my own town. It was just it was a very good production. There were very talented people in the cast. Some of them are still performing now. And anyway, so I just really loved it. And like watching the show, I was like, I've got to do more of this. And the very next time that Shoregrass Playhouse had a show that I could audition for, I did. And then that turned into, I wrote my first adaptation in the 7th grade of a story. And then, in high school, I got into the speech and debate and was doing community theater as well. And it just sort of snowballed from there. I think maybe one of the things that sealed the deal is when I was in high school, one of my high school jobs was reading the news on the radio and recording commercials and kind of doing those things. So I tell people like my first professional performing gig was when I was 17, like it started really early on.
Wow.
And then I just kind of never stopped. And it's just something that's been a part of my life ever since then.
That's awesome. I love that. So, um, what was the first role that made you think, "Oh, this is my life now"?
The first role that really let me know that other people liked what I did was when I was a senior in high school. This was also at Shortgrass Playhouse. And we were doing South Pacific. And I had auditioned just to be, a sailor, the ensemble. I just auditioned for all the shows there. That was just kind of what I did. If there was something for me, I would audition. And they cast me as Luther Billis. I'm like 18 or maybe even 17. And they cast me as Luther Billis. And then people just loved it. And it was just kind of that first time that people really said, oh, we really love what you did. And it's not just good job, from your aunt and uncle or whoever that came to the
Right.
show. It was like, people that didn't really know me that well, even, would comment on it at the grocery store. It was a small town. You'd run into people and they're like, oh, you were so funny with that tattoo. And, that was so great. And so that was really the first time that I was like, oh, people really like this. And around the same time, my high school did Bye Bye Birdie, and I played Conrad Birdie in high school, and people really loved that as well. And I, at that point, up to that point, I already knew that I loved it, but I was really just kind of doing it for myself. And then I realized, oh, people really like what I do as well. It's not just me wanting to come out here and have fun. This is something that, you know, I guess I'm doing something right here, kind of a moment. And then so those two roles were really pivotal. And then I had already decided to be a communications major in college. And I did that for 2 semesters. And then very quickly after being a communications major, I realized that really wasn't where I needed to be. I was trying to do the responsible thing and, have a degree that would get me all these jobs. Little did I know that, radio would not give me many jobs, but so I made a smart pivot without knowing it. And then that third semester, well, I guess the summer after that first year in college, I had my first professional theater gig, which was at Texas, the outdoor musical. I auditioned, got into that. That was great. I mean, just that first entry into the world of real professional theater where people from all over the world are coming to see it like that. And then, kind of getting through that threshold, it's like, oh, I can do this professionally. Like this is a very real option for me. And so when I went back, I was at Cameron University in Lawton at the time. And when I went back, I, joined the music program. I was in the opera that last semester that I was there. And then from there, I just kind of studied performing arts and worked in it ever since then.
Yeah, they've got a really good program at Cameron.
They do. I was in a really fun opera, La Sonnambula, I think was the opera that we did. But it was great.
Yeah. So how did you transition into Oklahoma City?
Cameron wasn't even though I loved the things I was studying at Cameron, Lawton wasn't necessarily the best fit for me. And I'd met a lot of new teachers at West Texas A&M University when I was doing Texas, the outdoor musical. And my plan was to go there because I had a voice teacher that I'd connected with there. There was a really good dance program there. And I was just like, I think this is going to be a better fit than Cameron. And I went and I studied voice that semester, and I was going to kind of like start back in the fall on like a theater arts degree or, so whatever their degree program was. And then just like once I got out there, I just realized I needed to come back to Oklahoma. Dated a guy and it didn't work out while I was there. And it was just like, I'm going to get back to Oklahoma. And so being from Hobart, the closest school there is Western Oklahoma State College. And I'd received a scholarship my senior year in high school. And they basically paid my tuition at any Oklahoma State school until I finished my bachelor's.
Wow.
So I had to pay through the other stuff, but my tuition was covered.
Nice.
The first semester, a whopping $9,997 or $997.
Yeah.
Things have gone up a lot.
Yeah.
No. But anyway, it was covered. It was a real blessing because I was able to graduate with no debt. Anyway, so I was back in Oklahoma. I went to a state school, and the voice teacher there, his name was Kirk Carson, and he had worked at Chicago Lyric Opera. He had worked at Lyric here. He had worked with the University of Central Oklahoma and had been in one of Sam McGurl's original operas that he had staged there. He had originated the role. And I started studying with him, and he was like, you need to go to a school that has a real program, a real musical theater program. He was like, don't just go anywhere because it's free. He was like, go to this school because
Right.
it's got a great program. And he helped me get in. He helped, like he took me up there. I did the audition, got into the program, helped me connect with a voice teacher. And then I got my bachelor's there and just never moved. So that's how I'm here.
Okay. You planted roots. So in all that journey, how did you get connected with the whole Fringe environment?
So my first introduction to the Fringe environment, there was a playwright that lived here for quite a while named Robert Matson. When I met him, he was in the company at the Pollard, and the Pollard had a full troupe of players, like a full company there, and he was a company member. But he also was really the only one that I knew of in Oklahoma City at the time that wrote original plays and like self-produced them. There may have been others, but he was the only one that I know of, even still now at that time. And I, they were, he wrote a lot of gay themed material. I'm gay. So I was like, I'm going to go audition for this play. And he cast me. And then it was called Beneath the Zipper. It was sort of the men's version of the vagina monologues. And he cast me in it, and it was really fun. People liked it, whatever. A couple of years later, he decided to take it to Chicago Fringe. He had family in the Chicago area, and he wanted them to see the show. And so he did some fundraisers, and like we all, the cast like rehearsed the show again. And then we all went to Chicago and did Chicago Fringe. And it was just such a cool experience, not only getting to kind of like do our own original work out of town, but then in that festival environment, you get to see all of these other creators that are making performance art work, whether that's a play or a musical or whatever. It's kind of hard to label some of these Fringe shows that you go see. But while we were there, and I didn't know anybody in Chicago at the time, so we went to see a whole bunch of other shows. And it was just really had a huge impact on me, uh, like how accessible this was. That being able to sort of go to a big city and do a show, and it just kind of lived with me. And I thought, how cool wouldn't it be great if we had one here in Oklahoma City? And my friend Todd Clark and I talked a few times about starting a Fringe festival here, but it's a lot of work, and I'm also a performing artist. And I realized that if I was to start a Fringe festival, that would have to be my performing arts work here almost exclusively. Like I wouldn't really be able to have the time to set up a proper festival, do it justice, and still, go be in the Odd Couple, somewhere else at audition and kind of do that. And also at the time I was very involved at Carpenter Square. And so I had, I kind of had commitments there and was working there a lot. And so it just kind of like was one thing that I had a really great experience with and just wished that we'd had one here. And then one day I got this email from Adam and Jenny, and somebody had given them my email address, and they're like, hey, we're starting a Fringe festival here. Can we come talk to you? And I said, yeah, sure. They came. We were in this conference room actually when we met, because they had just moved here and we met here, and they told me what they were going to do. I gave them they were really kind of like finding out what I thought about it, if I would want to submit something. They were kind of like pre-drumming up business for entries and like artists that may want to be involved with something like this here. And I already had kind of heard that there was a Fringe festival coming to town. But then once I met them, I was like, oh, yeah. I've got to jump in on this.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, as soon as that meeting was over, I started brainstorming about what would my submission be. I had already written several plays at this point, kind of like in the meantime, and had produced several plays on my own, and with a collection of friends that we produced some things together. And so it wasn't really daunting to kind of write that first script, but it was kind of having that idea. And so I had seen this documentary about sort of this conservative play festival that felt like plays were just too liberal. And so they had kind of decided to do the conservative theater festival. And I thought that was interesting. And so I wrote this play called the Ultra Conservative Theater Summit. And it was sort of like my meta imagination of what, um, what like, what some ultra conservative people would think is a Fringe festival. And so we had scenes with all of these characters, and it was sort of this scene about, at the time people were taking down the statues from like all of the people from the Confederate heroes, and they were
Right.
pulling them down. And so this was my meta scene about them speaking out against all of the taking down. And it was Mr. Waffle Fry from Chick-fil-A that had been put up to honor, the conservative character of Mr. Waffle Fry from Chick-fil-A. And like they were trying to get him taken down from the park. And then there were these other characters that came in and didn't want him taken down because of his importance. The Waffle Fry is iconic. Everybody loves the Chick-fil-A waffle fry. And so it was kind of my way, that play was my way of sort of having this conversation, because I do feel like multiple voices should be allowed in theater. I certainly think that there are topics that maybe don't necessarily aren't the theater is not the best place to explore those ideas, but certainly I think that lots of points of view belong in the theater. And I think that there's, I think I love the fact that so many plays are like conversations about a topic, and these characters get to have a conversation that it's hard for people to have.
Yeah.
And so that's what that play was. And and then so I did that. Then the next year was the pandemic year, and it was the virtual. I contributed something to that. I've been fortunate enough for my submission to get in almost every year, not every year, to Theatre Crude. But then, so I'd had a couple of shows in Theatre Crude. I've had my Chicago Fringe experience, and they were all really great. And then during 2020, my dad died by suicide.
Oh, no.
And, we weren't performing, like the theaters were closed. And so I was reading a lot, and I was thinking a lot about, what am I going to do? And I was doing some virtual theater on Facebook, and kind of like trying to be creative in that way. And then, my family had that tragedy occur, and it kind of sent me, to a different place, like
Sure,
when
that's-
something
yeah.
super tragic like that happens, and the circumstances of his death were very, very troubling. My parents' house burned down as part of what happened when he died by suicide. And so my mother didn't have a home, and there were all of these things that I was just dealing with psychologically at the time. And so, as you might know, like a lot of the best stories are created out of the ashes when something like that, when the house burns down, literally, I guess. And so I decided, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do like a Fringe tour. I was like, when the Fringe festivals start out, they have them all over the country. I was like, I'm going to go to some of those others. I was like, I've always wanted to kind of tour a little show. I've done a lot of stuff in Oklahoma City. I think it's time for me to do some stuff in some other places. So that was already kind of like the bug in my head. I'd also wanted to kind of do an adaptation because I hadn't done an adaptation of like a classic work since the 7th grade when, is there a story called Bearskin? I think there's like an old story about somebody that like he hides in a bearskin and he goes in the woods and that he trades his soul with the devil or something like that. It was like an old story. And I'd adapted that in the 7th grade. I think that's what it was called, was Bearskin. Anyway, but I hadn't really adapted anything since then. And, I'm just at home stirring around, the world's still semi-closed down, trying to think of like, what can I work on now? And long story short, decided to read the book of Ecclesiastes because a podcast said it's the weirdest book in the Bible. And I was like, oh, well, I'm gonna check that out. And so I, read the book of Ecclesiastes, and I was like, this is really something different. I didn't know that a text like this. Are you familiar with Ecclesiastes? Mm-hmm. So I didn't really realize, even though I'd read it in the, read the Bible in a year in high school thing, the Bible's a complicated set of books. And so, a 15-year-old isn't really ready to understand everything that's in there. And I read it again, and I was like, this is fascinating. And and actually as nihilistic as the book is, feels sometimes, it kind of like spoke to me with where I was with my life events psychologically.
Yeah.
And, and like the translation, this is headed somewhere. But the translation that I was reading at the time, it opens with "everything is meaningless," says the teacher, completely meaningless. So I used it was the New Living Translation.
Mhm.
And I was like, whoa, so you can imagine somebody that's trying to find meaning in the world.
Yep.
Like, what does all this mean? What does this tragedy with my dad mean? And then you open up the Bible and it starts with the book and it says everything is meaningless. And I was like, damn. And then anyway, after I read it and I read it again, and I was kind of like just kind of thinking of it as like my little self-help moment in my tragedy. And I was like, you know what? This is a monologue. This is all written from the point of view of a teacher sharing his ideas. I was like, I wonder if anybody's ever just performed this as a monologue. Did some research. Turns out didn't look like anybody had. And I thought about it a little more. And I was at Chantry Banks's birthday party. And I was talking to Caleb Bruza. And I don't know if you know these people, but people that listen might know these people. They're in the theater community now. I was talking to Caleb, and I was like, what would you think about this? Would you go see a Fringe show that was some guy just performing the book of Ecclesiastes as a monologue? And he kind of said, maybe not.
Yeah.
It's like, it was kind of pretty wild. But I started like working on my pitch, and I talked to a few people, and finally a couple people kind of responded, and they were like, that could be interesting. And I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And this is going to be my tour. I didn't, because it was right after, I had this idea kind of right after the Oklahoma City Fringe was. And I was like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna turn this into a show. So I worked with Emily Etherton to kind of like create a stage adaptation. Dr. Roberta Sloan kind of consulted with us as well. She's the artistic director of Jewish Theater of Oklahoma and one of my mentors from college. And so we kind of put this quirky little show together, and I submitted to 8 Fringe festivals, hoping I'd get into a couple, and I got into 5.
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, okay, I guess this is that tour that I said I was going to go on. And so I opened in Atlanta, with the non-plosive T. And I opened there, and it was a huge learning experience because I landed with this unexpected show, even for Fringe, a tough sell for a lot of people, and in a city where I really didn't know anybody. I just knew a couple of people. So I landed there and I did the show, and opening night was a little quirky or whatever. But then like people started hearing about the show, and I had a few really good audiences. I got more comfortable with the material. And then like that kind of that theater magic kind of got started. I finally figured out how to take this text that I didn't edit. I did it word for word. I didn't screw around with it. We had kind of like an opening sort of soundscape sequence to kind of help set it up theatrically. And I did perform it as this teacher, like walking down this dirt road, sort of Samuel Beckett style. And he kind of stops and tells the audience all of this stuff in the book of Ecclesiastes. But it was important to me to do it word for word, because I feel like if I had just tried to do excerpts, you wouldn't have the same power. Like, it's really interesting when you read it from beginning to end, and then you can sit there and be like, what was that? Like, what did that book just say? Anyway, but it kind of started clicking, and I was like, okay, this is going to work out. And I got some really good feedback. One of the things that the Atlanta Fringe Festival does is they have people from the community come and see your show, like a theater artist from Atlanta, and then they kind of rate it and they have their awards or whatever, but you see the feedback that those theater makers wrote about your show. And I didn't know any of them. And so I got this invaluable feedback about what they liked about the show, what they didn't like about the show. It was largely positive. And so it was almost like I had a little incubator production there in Atlanta. And then the next place, I think the next place I went was Denver. And so I did it in Denver. The space was very different. And then when I got to Kansas City, that show was just a great match for Kansas City. Kansas City has an enormous Fringe festival. They have like season patrons that come. Like, if you can imagine, like, I think that there are probably more season patrons at Kansas City Fringe than a lot of the community theaters in Oklahoma City have. It's just huge. They have shows spread out across the central core of the city. and there's people at all of them. And coincidentally, that voice teacher that guided me to UCO, he lives in Kansas City and came to see the show.
Very
So
cool.
that was kind of a cool full circle moment.
Absolutely.
Because he had been very encouraging early on. But anyway, and then I just continued to tour that show, and I was like, this is really a great format for me. I don't think, it's 1 hour. That's pretty standard at all the Fringe festivals. So there's certain things that you can't do at a Fringe festival, but for the most part, you can do whatever you want. If the festival lets you in, then you can create whatever play that you want to do. And there's no season ticket holders to say no. There's no board members to say no. There's no artistic director to say they don't want to do your play. If you get in, you got to do the play that you want to do. So for a theater artist like me, who performs and also writes, I was like, this feels like heaven,
Sure.
getting these opportunities. And then I go to these cities and these people come and see, these strangers come and see my show. It was just great. And then, and I took that show all the way to New York City Fringe the first time I did that festival. And that was the first time that I had ever performed in a theater show in New York. And then it was my show, so like that was a big, like personal achievement for me
Sure.
to get to do that. And then it just kind of like, since kind of that year, when I toured with that show Meaningless, it just kind of like reframed for me how my career as a performing artist is going to go. And so I still use that as a tool for working on my own shows. And like there was a show that I did at Indianapolis Fringe. We had a friend from here, Jennifer Wells, and she had moved to Indianapolis. We'd worked together many times here when she lived here. And then she'd been in Indianapolis and we'd stayed in touch, but we hadn't worked together. And I was like, let's just write a show and write a character for her. And so like I wrote a 2-person show. My husband, Scotty Taylor, was one of the characters. Jen was the other. And we just went to her basement and rehearsed the show in her basement and then debuted it at Indianapolis Fringe.
Very cool.
Which is another really big festival. Yeah. And so I guess like through the course of understanding how to use the format of a Fringe festival, to sort of facilitate my own creativity, but then also going back to what I said about Chicago Fringe, every festival I go to, I see at least 5 to 10 other shows.
Yeah.
So getting to see the work of all of these people from all over the world and what they're able to come up with and like original ideas. And, as it turns out, your dad dying is a big inspirational topic for a lot of people to write a show. But yeah. And so I fell in love with the format. There was, and I think it was summarized best. I've said a version of this already, but there was a show that an actress had written for herself together with her partner about Josephine Baker. And it was like in the big venue at Denver Fringe. Like Denver Fringe has like a headliner and it's somebody that's, been to Hollywood Fringe or one of the bigger festivals, and the Denver people will bring them in. And that was the show, Josephine Baker. And so they let her speak at kind of like the opening presentation. And she just looked at everybody that's there and she was like, just be grateful for being here, because unlike most things that you will do in your life, a Fringe festival is where you get to do anything you want to do as an artist.
Cool.
And that was kind of like that moment where I was like, yes, you can. That's why I love this. And then, so that's just echoed with me continuously. And for the most part, since then, anytime I have a new idea for a show, with only a couple of exceptions, I've always started it at a Fringe festival.
Very cool. Very cool. So you dove into it head first and haven't come back up yet.
Yeah.
So your work, a lot of your work tends to blend humor with commentary.
Mm.
So I love it. You like to tell stories, but you want to put a spin on it. Where does that voice come from?
Oh, that's a great question. I think here's what I can say is as a performer, I'm guessing on this because I really don't know the answer, but I'm going to guess. as a performer, I've always been primarily cast in comic roles. And so I guess there's just something inside where I kind of just understand comedy. I mean, that's what other people think. And now I see it too, like I can be pretty funny. And I've written, like you said, like most of the scripts that I've written have been largely funny. So I guess there's just something natural and that was, woven into my brain circuitry at some point in life
Ew.
where, like I just make people laugh and it's just kind of a natural thing. So I think that's part of it. But there's another part of me, and this is just kind of like, again, something somewhere in my psyche that I guess we could unpack for another on another episode where this came from. But like somewhere in my psyche, like I always somebody says something, say, that roof is blue. And I immediately am like, is it? Like it's just kind of like the skeptic. And it's not that I want to immediately refute what anybody says. But as soon as somebody says, and this is in all parts of my life, and they're like, this topic is exactly this way. This is the universal answer to this one thing. And immediately my brain is like, I bet that's not true. And I start thinking about, okay, is that true? What else could be true? And I sort of start having this conversation with myself. And sometimes, I'll end up and I'll say, okay, they're mostly right. They're mostly right. And like, if that's a conversation I'm having with a friend, I can say, I see where you're coming from. I think you're right. But most of the time, there's always that little thing in my head. And I was like, there's another part to this. And in the religious, in the spiritual tradition of Taoism, there's the idea that, like you have black and you have white, and then you have all of those, that gradient in between.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing with, and any two opposites, male and female or good and evil. You have the extremes and then you have the stuff that's in between. And that symbolism really resonates with me because I think that life is often like that. I think that it's really easy for us as humans to make these decisions about what we believe in, and it's this one exact thing. And really there's some wiggle room in there for almost everything. That's just my opinion on how the world works. And so I think that probably comes out in the writing and in the characters that I write, this idea that there really are very few absolutes in the world. And so then that comedy ends up being kind of this internal conversation or this internal sort of raising of the question. And I guess I would also say that my favorite plays that I see are the ones that kind of let me make a decision about what it was about at the
Okay.
end, or what those characters, the ones that sort of like come out at the end. And this happens a lot in musicals. Like I just saw Sister Act at Lyric and it was great. But sort of there's this moment where the two characters kind of come in and they sort of like very briefly sort of arrive at the meaning of life, or something like that. And I'm just like, okay, is it really, like that voice kind of happens. I'm like, this has been great, but did we need to do that? So I guess in an effort to keep that sort of the thing out of my shows, my shows end up just being these large conversations. And then, since my tone of voice is kind of funny, I guess that's why it is.
There you go. So, in that same frame of thought or that vein, I guess, we talked a little bit about Fringe and all of this stuff. And you have created a character that has started becoming quite a big thing as of late. Actually has his own Facebook profile and everything else. And for those people that know Rodney, we know that we're talking about Presley Tweed. So let's talk about Presley for a minute. Where did that character come from?
It came from, I was really good friends with the owner of a drag bar. His name's Brett Young. There's a Brett Allen Young and Brett Everett Young. This is Brett Allen Young, also known as Kitty Bob Ames. And he had a drag bar and he opened up and he was doing shows and he had invited me to, perform. And a couple of times I went out there and I did drag and it just wasn't for me. But I did like sort of that a drag show is essentially a cabaret show. It's a lot of lip syncing most of the time, but they're essentially like little cabaret shows and people come out and they do their numbers and they have these characters that they built. You drag performers build a following, they have a fan base, all these things. But that, it just really wasn't the right fit for me. And so I kind of came up with this idea of Presley Tweed. And I was trying to figure out how to sort of like be a male character, which felt a little bit more right for me, but still kind of like have something campy. And I'd been kind of thinking about some different stuff. And then there's a local actress named Pat Tweed. She used to be married to Chuck Tweed, if you know Chuck. But anyway, they're exes now. But Pat Tweed was a friend, and I saw her a lot, is a friend, and I was hanging out a lot with her and Ellen Baird and Brenda Williams at the time. And we were just kind of having drinks, and Pat had adopted this dog, Bichon Frise, and his name was Presley. And so, like, I was like, "Oh, your dog's name is Presley Tweed," and I was like, "What a great name for a lounge singer would that be, Presley Tweed?" And so we were kind of there, and I was just kind of like started like had the air mic up in front of my mouth, and kind of started like Presley Tweed would talk like this, and it just kind of like instantly I started doing that, and I was like, "Oh, this is what I could do, like at this drag bar." And so the first few times I did it, I would just sort of like, all of the drag performers would do their number, and then everybody's got to change clothes. And I would just kind of go out there in a glittery jacket and kind of sing a funny song and just kind of like add some variety to those shows. So that's where it started. And then when I resigned from the board at Carpenter Square, where I'd been involved for a very long time, and kind of stopped being involved there, I had all this time on my hands because I'd almost exclusively been creating theater there, not exclusively, but for the most part. And so like I had all this free time on my hands, and Brett had just opened up a larger venue and moved the Boom into a brand new theater that he built. And so they were looking for programming, they were looking for people help, fill stuff on the stage. And I had people had thought that this character was funny a few times. And me and my friend Rebecca McCauley, we'd started writing, and I was just like, well, what if Presley had what if we told his story? What if we told his show? And it's like a big variety show with the sequin curtains hanging down and all the thing, and everybody can just kind of come in, and he meets all of these people, and everybody comes in, and the other people get a chance to do something quirky and funny too. So it was sort of like my version of hosting a show. And yes, it was starring me as my character, but it was really and I wanted to do that. I wanted to kind of make this character into something bigger and see how it went. But I've also theater is so collaborative, and there's you had said when we were talking before we started recording, there's so many talented people in Oklahoma. And that there's always room for more opportunities for these people to showcase their talent.
Yes.
And so kind of my vision with that first show is I was like, okay, let's have we have me, as Presley Tweed, and then we have sort of his background singers, but then let's have 10 other people that show up at a different time, and they kind of come in. And one of the things we did with that show is we didn't really explain to people very much what it was really going to be about. We just said it was going to be a show. We said it was going to be starring Presley Tweed. But we really didn't do anything other than make some early quirky YouTube videos of behind the scenes footage, and then we sort of made people come to the show to see what it was we were actually putting together. But then once that format was out of the bag, that it's kind of a cabaret show written together with what's presented as these real life stories, but they're actually complete fiction, but they're presented as if this is his real life, and he talks to them just as somebody would tell their own story. Liza Minnelli would tell stories about Judy or whatever, but Presley, it's all made up. It's not real. But once that format was out of the bag, it really worked, and people really loved it. We did another show, I think maybe a few months later. We did one weekend of a Valentine's Day special. Then another year or two later, we did another Presley Tweed show, and it really, it just people really loved it, and it was a format that really gave a lot of people a chance to showcase, but also being involved with the show is a big time commitment as well, and so it gave the opportunity for some people that maybe didn't have time to commit to a 4-week rehearsal process and a 4-week run, which a lot of the theaters were doing at the time. We would do 1 or 2 weekends, and we would rehearse 8 times. It was a lot more of a casual process. So really, like, it got to be this cool thing for just a few years where people were coming in and they'd get to like sing a funny song and play a funny character, and then everybody would have a great time, and that's what it was. And um, then it just kind of like we'd done it a few times, and it just like because of that, I started like uh, making connections with other people, and so I started getting other work, and yeah, and then so recently, uh, I was trying to think about what my next show was going to be. What did I want to put together next? And somebody had recently mentioned, they're like, "Well, when's Presley Tweed coming back?" And I was like, "Well, I guess it could be now." And then yeah, and then it just kind of like it came back. I wrote the show, and I my newest show, which is Fancy AF, Presley Tweed Fancy AF. I did that first in Providence, Rhode Island, and then I did it in Baltimore. And my initial plan was to bring it to the Theatre Crude Fringe Festival here, like as kind of the next stop. But I ended up but I ended up bringing the show Thank You Places, which we'd done in Indianapolis. I ended up doing that, submitting that for Theatre Crude as well. So it was just kind of on the rocks for a while. And then honestly, like my husband, he was just like, what if you submitted your Presley Tweed show to New York City Fringe? It was like, then we could go to New York for 3 weeks again. Cause like that's when we did Meaningless, like we lived in New York for a month and it was great. And I was like, oh, well, I guess we could, that would be fun to go, spend another month in New York and do another show. And so I submitted it there, and we did it at this cool venue in Brooklyn called The Rat. And they do a lot of like musical, like kind of musical sketch comedy and a lot of improv. And it was the perfect setup for a show like this because it was kind of small. Some, New York venues, sometimes you're just crammed into the building, and that people have like just built a theater inside of this space.
Little dive bars.
A little dive bar, yeah. And this was a little better than a dive bar, but it was kind of that kind of vibe. I mean, it's called The Rat.
Yeah.
Like so there was already kind of like this tongue-in-cheek joke about the venue even. And that's always been the thing with Presley Tweed is like his persona. He's always tried to be a big star, but something happens every time he's about to get his big break, he doesn't get it. And so he knows all of these people, and he knows Reba McEntire or whoever the celebrity he's talking about, but he never actually worked with them. He had a falling out with them, or he had a fight with them at somebody's house. That's kind of the joke with him. So a place called The Rat was the perfect place for that. And so anyway, yeah. And so a lot of people just expressed that they were interested in seeing the show. And then I connected with the new owner of the Boom and the artistic director there now, Josh McGowan, and we found a couple of weekends, and so we're going to do it again the last weekend in August and the first weekend in September.
There you go. So that'll be cool.
Yeah,
that'll be cool. So now you just got through directing a show. What was that all about?
Remind me what show I
was hoping you.
Let me think. So I directed several this year.
I think it was in the Paseo.
Yeah. So at the beginning of this year, I directed a show called The Apple Tree, which is a classic musical that's not produced very often. The full thing is a 3-act musical, but you can do each of the acts independently. It was for Jewish Theater of Oklahoma, and Roberta Sloan reached out to me about directing. I had worked with her before. I'd done some sound design and directed for her before, and she knew that this project was coming up. And so I directed The Apple Tree, and it was really cool because it's Adam and Eve and the snake. And it's the story of, it's the first creation story from Genesis, about the Garden of Eden. And, but it's written as a musical. It's kind of written in the style of like 60s, 50s, 60s Catskills style, kind of like post vaudeville. It's a very interesting little show. But I got to cast my husband as Adam. Our friend Amanda Lee was Eve, and I went to college with her. We went to college with her, and so I'd known her for a very long time. And then the Snake was played by Jeffrey Ambrosini, who I think he teaches at SNU, is a voice teacher at SNU. But I had worked with him. We were both in the Jerry Herman musical Milk and Honey the year before. So I got to work with people that I'd worked with before and obviously knew a long time. And it was one of those, it was like during the middle of the winter. So we were like fighting with the snow, and like we had to postpone because it was just a one weekend effort. And so we had to postpone because that big, snowpocalypse that we had, it just happened to come the day before we were supposed to open. And so we moved and we did that there. And that was a really great experience. I love directing musicals. When I started performing, I was mostly in musicals. I studied musical theater. My degree's in music. And then when I got out of college, a lot of the opportunities were in plays, and I realized I love the contemporary voice of the modern plays that Carpenter Square was producing. And so there was kind of like a pivot from all of these musicals I'd done all of these years to like really contemporary theater. And I think it's given me a unique perspective when I'm directing something, because I really have a pretty substantial background at this point in both performing and directing both musicals. I've directed a couple of operas now. So like I've kind of, because I haven't necessarily been tied to one place, and I've done these Fringe festivals and created kind of a wide variety of shows without a lot of restrictions. I think it really helps me be able to go into some of these shows that have been around a long time and really give them a kind of a fresh perspective and give it some fresh eyes. So that was fun to do with that. And then actually later, since then, I directed another show at the Carpenter Square venue that was also a Jewish Theater of Oklahoma production called The Cemetery Club, which is a play that's been around. It's not at all like The Apple Tree. It's about some older, Jewish ladies that kind of have this club where they go visit their dead husbands' graves once a month. So like very different fare, but was also just an incredible experience, and got to work with a lot of performers that I hadn't worked with before, and a couple that I had. And I love that new venue that Carpenter Square has.
Absolutely.
The stage is just incredible, and the seating is so comfortable. We've been talking a lot about making theater, but I see a lot of shows. I mean, it's rare that more than 2 weeks will go by that I don't see something else.
Yep.
I see a lot, and man, I just love those comfortable seats, and I love the new parking lot there. So I really love their venue, and I've been able to direct 2 shows there now, and the most recent being both with Jewish Theater of Oklahoma, but renting that venue. And I just really love staging things in that space.
Yeah, it's a really good theater. I've gotten the opportunity to both act in that space and visit it several times, and it's really, really good. So we've talked a lot about your performing and moving all over the place. Talking about things that you've written, some notable names: Pricks, the vaccine musical, Worthy Causes, All of My Ex-Boyfriends Are Gay. You were also a member of the Dramatists Guild of America. Very impressive. So yeah, you said you started writing even 7th grade. Making your own adaptation. Where do you come up with these ideas?
It's always different. It is always different. They almost always come from just like something that I am watching happen, like I'm observing something in the world, and there's just kind of something on my mind, like, I'll read a story in the New York Times, or I'll see a trend of sort of a frame of mind that people have on social media, because, I think anybody that spends any kind of amount of time on social media or engaging with any kind of media now, you can kind of feel societal trends. One of the ones that I usually bring up for this when I'm talking about this is like when I was in school, there was like the be all that you can be trend. And so we had like 10, 15 years of like, you can do it, be all you can be. And that's kind of now morphed into me, you know, I this is my opinion and observation anyway. This may not be matter of fact to everyone, but to me, I see that that's turned into, you know, there's really this me first kind of position that a lot of people have. And I think that that was like rooted in B. Not that either of those notions are bad. But I also don't think that either of those notions are exclusively good either. You know, as I brought up earlier, I think things really have a much more nuance than people want to give them credit for. And so like a lot of the things that I've seen, I'll catch a glimpse of the story and I'm like, that connects with this, this, this thing about the world that I'm trying to answer for myself. And so a great way to kind of deal with that and wrestle with how I feel about that topic or how I feel about that story or both is to write a script about it. I mean, and I could probably write short stories and, you know, in another universe, I might, you know, be writing novels, but it just so happens I'm in theater. Theater's what I know. So you write the script.
There you go.
And it also gives my friends opportunities to be in something else. You know, once I write a script, then, you know, like my friends or local artists at large, you know, have a new opportunity once we put it on its legs. So, I mean, I think that that's where it comes from. So Worthy Causes, interestingly, was born out of this idea that, you know, people want to do good things. And, you know, you have this person over here that says, oh, you know, my cause that I'm fighting for is really the best cause. It's the most high priority cause that you should have in your life. Well, you have somebody over here that's from another group that might lose something if, you know, from this group. You know, there's always a give and take. The world is not fair. Again, in my opinion, and the opinion of the book of Ecclesiastes, but this just coincidentally. But you know, life isn't fair. And so like when this person over here is built up, like, you know, somebody over here might lose something or might have a different perspective,
Of course.
from what's going on here. And so and still, I don't really know what the answer is to resolving that. It's not, and maybe there's not a resolution, but Worthy Causes, for example, was my attempt to, I mean, I just couldn't figure out how I felt about this observation about the world. And so I wrote that to try and figure that out. I didn't figure it out, but we tried in Worthy Causes and it was interesting. The example that we used in that, was, you know, there was a person who was an animal activist and, you know, was very against, dog breeding and was very against chicken farms and all those things. And then we had other characters that were like, well, you know, like my family's dog breeders, like that's what paid for my college, you know, and like, and so trying to present both of those sides and like have these characters engage in a conversation. So that's a really good example of, you know, me really being inspired by what I see going on in the world and trying to figure that out. But then there's other things, you know, kind of like I mentioned that the Presley Tweed character came from, you know, having drinks with a dog named Presley Tweed. And I was like, gonna be a person. So like, that's very different, obviously. And then another really interesting thing too, is when I was doing Meaningless at Denver Fringe. And this was 2022, maybe 2023. You know, but you know, obviously there have been a lot of very public conversations about vaccines. You know, like once the COVID-19 pandemic started, you know, there's all of this information and it was just like, there's all of this information and nobody seemed to agree. And you would have doctors over here saying one thing and politicians saying something else. And, so that was all kind of going on, but it wasn't really anything I wanted to write a show about. And we were kind of sitting around, after Meaningless at Denver Fringe and the show had just closed and we're like, so what do we want to write for next year? You know, it's like, let's start thinking now about what we want to enter next year. And I was like, we need something with a name that really zings. And so me and my husband and Claire Powers, our friend that was part of, give me just a second. Me and my friend Claire Powers that was part of Meaningless, we were just sitting there and we were just brainstorming the wackiest names that we could think of. And I was just like, well, we should do them. And Claire, I think, said she wanted to do something where we could sing. And I was like, okay, what could our musicals be? And then I just kind of tumbled out with Pricks the Vaccine musical and everybody laughed. And then a few months later, I brought it. I didn't really start on it. It was just a joke. We were kind of brainstorming wacky titles. And then a few months later, we were just kind of having a conversation with another group of people. And I said, they said, "What's your next Fringe going to be?" And I was like, "Oh, it might be Perks the Vaccine Musical." And everybody laughed. And I was like, "Oh, well, maybe this is a title that is provocative enough that people would come see it." And then I just wrote it. I didn't even really know what the show would exactly be. And it turned out to be sort of this like after school special. Or if you did you tell me you're from Oklahoma?
Yes.
So Northeastern, I think it was Northeastern University in Miami. They used to have this troupe that traveled around the state that was called Risque Business.
Mhm.
And it was sort of like anti-drug and like that kind of thing. And so so that was kind of like around in my mind as I was writing this pics of that. And I was like, well, what if Risque Business did a show about vaccine science? And like did some songs, but like one of the things with Risque Business, because I saw them, they came to Hobart a few times, and they would always have on like neon sunglasses, and they were very much trying to do things that kids would think were cool. And so we really did that. And so Pricks the Vaccine Musical was largely inspired by my memories of Risque Business.
Oh, nice.
And kind of the anti-drug. But instead, I just read 3 books about vaccine science. And then, of course, there, with any kind of medical science, there's differences of point of view. But one of the things that was important to me is like, okay, what did happen historically? What is true? What is the historical record? Let's stay as close to what everybody agrees on as possible, and let's put that in the show. And so that's what we did.
Nice. So yeah, always something funny. Side note on sidebar there, I'm actually a NEO. I was a theater major at NEO.
Yeah.
Did not get into Risque Business, but I was part of the Masters program. So,
Oh, cool.
So, yeah.
That's still around?
I don't know if they're still doing Risque Business or not, but yes, they have an amazing theater program up there. An enormous auditorium.
I've been there. I went to Boise State, and at the time in 1997 or whatever, Boise State was there. It may still be, but I remember going into the theater. And again, this was before I'd really decided I'm going to be a theater artist. But I went into that theater, and they had these huge pictures of all their productions or some of their productions. Mm-hmm. They were gorgeous. I mean, like, it was just like the pictures of the work that they did there. I was like, this is happening in Oklahoma at this university, like, or college or whatever it is. Yeah. So I've been there.
I was amazed at, the size of the theater and the performances that they put on, and it was a junior college.
Yeah.
It was quite amazing. So I got hooked on it. So this is kind of the part where I'm really excited to dive into about what you've got coming up.
Okay.
Now, one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you, again, talking about your connection with Theatre Crude. What a lot of people don't understand is that Theatre Crude does more than just the Fringe Festival. Mm-hmm. They have several different programs that go on throughout the year, and they have one coming up called 5/5. Mm-hmm. And 5/5 basically the premise is they take a show or a book or a movie or whatever, and they break it up into 5 parts. They give those 5 parts to 5 different groups of people. They have to come up with their own interpretation of that without talking to anyone else, and then bring it all back together and see what happens. A lot of fun, a lot of humor, a lot of laughs, and just so happens you and your group of people, and I believe is it Presley Tweed?
It is.
And are actually doing a portion of this without breaking any theater laws or anything like that, or spilling the beans or anything. By the dropping of this show, this will be coming out on Friday, and the 5/5 will be Monday night. So there's a few nights in between for you guys hearing this episode and being able to get there to OK Cider in downtown Oklahoma City to see 5/5. What is your group going to be involved with doing?
Yeah, so the Theatre Crude folks, they split the movie for you. So you go, and this is the 3rd time I've done a parody sketch for this type of event for them. But they kind of come and they've got it divided up, and they sort of like there's some sort of like always some sort of way, like fair way to like assign out all the parts. But we got part 4, and so I got part 4. I went home that night. It's on Paramount Plus to watch if anybody wants to watch Titanic before Monday. It's very long, but my section is part 4, and it's really like the iceberg's already hit, and the water's coming in down below. They're starting to get people on the lifeboats, but it's that section where the band keeps playing. And I was like, and I already knew because I'm doing a Presley Tweed show, as I mentioned, in the fall, and so I was like, well, this is going to be a cross promotion. Like I'll write Presley Tweed as a character in this parody, just to kind of like give us a reason, like people, an introduction to this character that maybe haven't seen him before. And so I was like, well, what if Presley was the entertainment on the Titanic, and like the ship is sinking, and him and the band just keep playing. And so that's the premise of our section. And so the way that we'll be doing it is Taylor Etherton, who's an incredible musician. He wrote the music for a show called Smoke and Mirrors that we did at Fringe a couple of years ago. But he's going to be playing the guitar live. And so him and Presley are the band. And then all of the other people in the scene are the other characters from Titanic that you might be familiar with. So we meet Cal, we meet Rose and Jack, of course. And then we meet Molly Brown. She kind of comes in and she's sort of the voice of everybody else on the boat in this scene. And so we do some fun references and maybe a couple of Kathy Bates jokes in there as well.
I can only imagine. No, so obviously, as you said, Titanic is a very, very long movie, very, very big script and all that kind of other stuff. So how did they break it down? Do you guys have a time limit that you have to work in?
Well, the parody that we do has the maximum of 10 minutes. So, no matter what, it's a loose interpretation because my section of the movie is like 42 minutes long.
Sure.
And so, the each of the groups that comes together have different backgrounds. So sometimes there's been dance troupes, there have been improv comedy troupes, there's been prop comedy troupes, there's been performing arts performance art adaptations. Last year, Ashley Mandanis did, I believe it was the fifth of The Shining, and they did a commentary about how Shelley Duvall was treated in the movie as part of it. So it's really, as I mentioned earlier, it's Fringe, so you can do whatever you want to a certain extent. And these people, and so that's what the groups do. And so I have no idea, except for maybe a teaser graphic that somebody's posted on Instagram, what any of the other people are doing. I happen to know most of the other artists that are involved with this, but we're not talking about it. We're not texting each other.
Right.
Like the part of the fun is the surprise
Right.
of seeing how these 5 pieces fit back in together. And it's always really interesting. And one thing that's happened in the past, no guarantees this time, but one thing that's happened in the past is a lot of times the groups, they pick up on quirky things about the movie kind of independently of one another, but there's sort of like a thread to some of those odd things about the movie, and everybody kind of picks up on them independently, and it kind of like brings it all together on the night in that unique way that really only happens live.
Sure.
And,
absolutely.
With no editing room and just everybody seeing what happens. And that's always one of the cool things about this particular event.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about, theater, the Fringe Festival coming up and all of the stuff you got going on with Presley Tweed and all this other stuff. So long term for Rodney, where do you see your artistic journey heading in, say, the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, every time I have a plan for that, something changes. Because, there was at one point and I was like, I'm really just going to write scripts and I'm going to send those out and I'm really going to kind of pursue the playwright side of things. But almost immediately after I decided to do that, I get a gig directing Inherit the Wind at Third Act Theater Company, like these kind of like these gigs kind of come along, and it's like, oh well, I don't want to turn that down. And then also, like sometimes I just like audition and get in the show, and then I don't want to turn that down. Or on rare occasions, somebody will say, hey, we didn't have anybody auditions for this. Are you free to come see this? And so I love performing. I mean, I really, really love directing. So I would say that 10 years from now, I think there's a good chance I'll still be doing all of those three things to some extent. Um, we live in the Paseo and we love that neighborhood. So there's really there's no active plan to, move away and be based anywhere else. But, the economics of performing arts in Oklahoma City, I mean, there are limits to that. Talking about like just this audience development. Um, Oklahoma City, there's a limited number of audience members available. You have, and I say this from experience, there are some people that will go see every Broadway tour that comes to the Civic Center, but they won't come see Inherit the Wind at North Park Mall, even though the show might arguably, in some people's eyes, be just as good or better for some of those tours.
Sure.
That's not going to be their thing.
Right.
And I say that as now as having performed theater in other cities around the country. There's other cities where that's not as much the case.
Sure.
Kansas City is a great example where, like, performing arts people, they're ready for anything. They will go see different formats of theater. Maybe not everybody in town, but there are thousands of people in Kansas City that are kind of like always looking for that opportunity. Where can we go see a live show? And that's something we don't necessarily have here in Oklahoma City yet. What's the answer to that? Not sure. What I can say is in St. Louis, it seems like St. Louis, like people come out of the womb as theater patrons. I mean, St. Louis, people love theater. You have, people will be sitting at, Taco Bell talking about Sondheim. Like it's crazy how much people love theater in St. Louis. And we just don't have that here. So, as far as only exclusively being here, if I do continue to try and kind of like expand, expand the reach. My one chief aim that I wrote down in a journal somewhere is, to create collaborative performing arts work to be viewed by as many people as possible. That's kind of like the personal game and personal goal.
Sure.
And I think I'm working on that. And certainly taking shows out of town has been part of that. What will it take to achieve that? And it might be somewhere else, but it might be here in Oklahoma City. I love Oklahoma from here. I can't say that I've like loved everything about it all along,
Of course.
because people have sometimes a contentious relationship with the place that they're from.
Yeah.
Some people don't. I have. It's certainly, I've encountered obstacles. Here, like every door hasn't been fully swung open for me the whole time. But I think we're in a really good spot right now as far as local people more broadly appreciating the local culture.
Mhm.
So you have more people seeing live music. I see more people showing up to, I think Scissortail Park has been a big part of this, because Scissortail Park has become this place where you can go see events there. And there's this great combination of out of town performances, local performances. And it's sort of like given this common space where people start seeing that, they're these aren't two different types of people. These are all just performers.
Mhm.
You may know some of them from YouTube and some of them from MTV and, some of them from Jewel Box, but all of these people have talents that they can bring. And I feel like Scissortail Park has been a great place. And the events that are hosted at Scissortail Park has been a great place for bringing that together. I think the Plaza District too,
Mhm.
because you have Lyric Theater and you have, Grand Royale that has live music, and you have OK Improv. And so there's this one district that's got, performing arts on very different budgets,
Mhm.
and like on a very different scope and scale with very different missions, but they're all in the same block.
Yeah.
And I think that helps people understand, there's value to all of these.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that will lead to, like some more audience development here, and people really like seeking out locally grown arts of all kind,
Yeah.
paintings, whatever. I'm in performing arts, so I think of that.
Sure.
But I hope that can be something here. And if we can reach that level, I think I would just love to stay here and continue to just like influence and be a positive influence on what we get to do here. Not only opportunities for myself, but helping try and cultivate opportunities for other people too, like as a director and a playwright.
Awesome. I love that. Well, Rodney, as we come to our close of our time here, what I like to do, I end every one of my episodes with what we call our curtain call curveballs. I know you were looking forward to this, as so many people that have listened to the podcast are. And so these are just random questions. Some may be about theater, some may not. They're really just kind of off the top of your head, definitely off the wall. And so we'll just kind of see where this goes, okay?
Okay.
First question. What is the worst audition song you've ever chosen?
I auditioned for Oklahoma at Lyric Theater, not the most recent production, but the one before. And for some reason that I still to this day don't know why, I sang Unworthy of Your Love from Assassins. And the table was clearly speechless. Like they were like, what? Like just the looks on their faces. And of course they were very gracious and thank you very much and whatever. And at the time I didn't really realize what a mistake that was. That I really don't know why. I think maybe I just had a cutting of it and I decided to go. And that's the worst audition song I've ever chosen.
Didn't quite catch that in the vein of the show.
I was not cast. I was not cast.
Okay. So if your personality were a gas station snack, what would people be grabbing off the shelf?
Fritos and blue cheese dressing.
Okay. Interesting combination. I like it. What's the favorite line that you've ever delivered?
Okay, this is a tough one for me because I know myself and I very frequently forget my lines as soon as the show is closed. I'm not that person that remembers the lines. I'm going to pivot on this answer and just say that one of the most special things I've ever done in my life, I'm kind of tearing up, I don't know why, but was getting to share Ecclesiastes with people in an environment that there were no judgments. There was no, just said the words. And that book is so fascinating to me even now.
Yeah.
And it starts in such I don't know why I'm tearing up, but it starts in such a powerful way. And he says, everything is meaningless, says the teacher, completely meaningless. Situations come and situations go, but the world never changes. And it just starts into this 45 minutes of some of the most interesting things I've ever heard. And getting to share that with people again and again, it was so meaningful for real.
Well, that's good. That's good. Yeah, it's definitely a very powerful book.
Yeah. And, I try to avoid people ask me what I think about it and what my takeaways, and I'm a little cagey about it because I want people to have their own experience with what all of those things mean. And but getting to just share them and, I was performing them. So of course it's told through my point of view, you can't extract those two things, the actor from what the actor is saying. But yeah, it was incredible to get to share all of those lines.
Okay. What's the most chaotic thing that has ever happened during a Fringe performance?
During a Fringe performance,
which is, pretty chaotic in itself, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the most chaotic things that's ever happened at a Fringe performance was when I was in the audience, actually. There was a show at Theatre Crude last year, and it was called The Production, I think was the name of that. And I didn't really know the context of the show going in. I was just kind of like, trying to see as many shows as possible. I saw the name, I saw that I could go, and I went. And the show was like the premise of the show, it was like a recreation of a group of people creating a production of a show. Um, and I figured out during, like, really afterward through conversations with other people, that these people had had kind of this shared negative experience as children in a children's theater group. And so the whole, like, it was a largely improvised experimental kind of show. Um, and it was supposed to be immersive and all these things. But I was so mildly traumatized by what was going on, because I didn't know that these people were trying to recreate this negative situation that they had been a part of, and kind of like show people how bad it can be. And that still may not be exactly what they were trying to do, but it's certainly what happened. And I have never in my life wanted to run away screaming, because I mean, I work so hard when I'm a director or when I'm a producer to create pay attention to people's time, respect people's contributions, even when, I mean, I'm always able to pay people a little bit when I'm producing a show, sometimes more than others. But as many performers in Oklahoma City know, a lot of our time is essentially volunteer time. We're doing this because we believe in the craft of it. We believe in sharing this. We think it's fun, it's something that we do for the pleasure of it, for the most part, even when there's a little bit of money, a little bit of compensation. And it's so important for me to create an environment where everybody feels so respected. And so to sort of like be sitting in this room and seeing people do this show that's about the opposite of that, I I I I fancy myself as a theater goer who can go and see anything. I've seen so many different types of shows. I've seen shows where cisgender white men are the topic of the criticism, and I take it and I listen, and it's great. I want to see those shows and I want to hear people tell those points of view. But this is that one time where I was really sitting there thinking, I might need to leave before I am psychologically injured by what's going on in the show. So that's the most chaotic thing that's happened in the Fringe show for me.
Okay. If you could have a completely useless superpower, what would it be?
Oh, wow. A completely useless,
Or maybe we'll say seemingly useless. So it may not be useless.
useless superpower. I would love to be able to access at any time any ingredient that's ever been called for in any recipe. I love to cook.
Oh, yeah.
And, we are fortunate enough. I mean, like, the Oklahoma City Metro is basically 7 cities. So we have a lot of options here,
Absolutely, yeah.
for being a city this size. But sometimes there's that one ingredient that you just can't find, or maybe the shipping's really expensive when you order it online or whatever. And I would love just to be able to, if I see a recipe and I want to make that tonight, I love to be able to just snap my fingers and have everything I need, no matter how obscure the tarragon vinegar is or whatever it is. I would love to be able to have that.
That would be neat. What's the weirdest costume you've ever worn?
The weirdest costume I've ever worn. Well, I mean, as a comic performer, I guess I would think that I would have worn some weirder costumes, but I'm trying to think right now. Um, I've worn clown costumes in a couple of shows, and that was pretty weird. Uh, I You know what? I don't think I've worn that many weird costumes now that I think about it. I've worn lots of uncomfortable costumes.
Sure.
I did Shakespeare in the Park one year, and I mean, like, my tunic was made out of upholstery fabric. It was so hot.
Ugh.
So that was weird in that way. I was in tights and a couch is what I was
Oh my
wearing,
gosh.
essentially.
Dude.
So that was a little bit weird. I'm sure that I've done shows like, like quirky shows at the Boom where I've worn something, but, um, yeah, I would say maybe the killer clown in Wonder of the World at Carpenter Square was a pretty weird costume. I'll go with that.
Okay. What is one thing outside of theater that you totally geek out about?
Hmm. Food. We brought up
Sure,
food.
sure.
I definitely geek out about food, and when I go to a restaurant, I'm a big fan of cooking my own food, but I do still go to restaurants on occasion, usually somebody's birthday. And so when I go to a restaurant, the first thing I do is I read the menu in its entirety, and I look for an ingredient that I've never had before. I look for a combination that I've never seen before, and if I can find that in the menu, I that's always what I get because I'm so adventurous when it comes to making food, eating food. I definitely geek out about food. Um, Something that's maybe a little bit nerdier that I geek out about is I really love TV shows about like spies and espionage. And so I basically, even if I don't love it, if I find a new show, I feel like I've watched a lot of them, at least on the streaming channels that I pay for. And if I find a new one, I almost always have to watch the first 3 episodes right away. I don't know why I love spies on TV. I just love it.
Okay. Is there a dream role that you've never played but that you absolutely want to?
Oh, um, people ask this sometimes, and I've never really been a big dream role person. Uh, I definitely don't have a list. I would love to play Sweeney Todd and Sweeney Todd. So that, but that more comes from I really want to sing those songs, like they're so good.
Yeah.
And when I first started like actually studying vocal technique, like right away I was trying to pull out that stuff. I was not ready for it at the time, but I was so drawn to that character and what he sings. So I guess that would have to be the dream role that
Okay.
I would put my finger on.
I can see that. I
Yeah.
can see that. Okay, so if theater didn't exist for you, what would you be doing?
Well, theater doesn't pay all the bills. So the other thing that I do right now is marketing.
Okay.
And so career wise, I would probably just do a lot more marketing work and less theater work.
Fall back on that communications.
Yeah, fall back on that communications degree that I never finished getting. I mean, it's really hard. Like really almost every job I've had, like even my like 9 to 5 jobs, not all of them. Um, because some of them were in sales, but even a sales job, there's a little bit of character play
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
storytelling in a
Yeah.
sales job. So that's really been just so much of my life that's hard to say. I one of I do know the answer to this actually now that I think about it. So um I was in the sales team for a website at News 9. They own this website called ineedthis.com. And the website closed. The website wasn't working. There were many reasons. They closed the website and the sales team, at least the newbies on the sales team were let go. And I have to say that the best place I've ever been fired from was News 9. I'd been there for 7 months and they gave me 2 months of severance and they hired a job coach that
Wow.
rewrote my resume. If you're going to get fired, News 9 is the place to get fired. It was laid off, but anyway. But I got a job at the time. I was more in sales as my sort of 9 to 5 job, and I got a job selling cemetery grave plots at Rose Hill Cemetery, and the pay was terrible, and so I couldn't stay with it. But I really loved that job, and I really loved being able to have conversations with people when they were in their time of need. I went to I think I was only there for maybe 5 or 6 months before I just needed a better paying job. And I mean, I probably went to 30 or 40 funerals in that time because that was our job, was to be there, make sure that everything went well, And then if they had any questions about, where grandpa's going to get buried someday or whatever, to help them with that. If people, anyway, I won't go into the details of that job, but one of the things that I really loved going to those funerals and like listening to what the preacher or the chaplain or whoever was speaking would say in reflecting on that person's life.
Mhm.
And they were wildly different. Like there was one guy, I went to this one funeral that was held like at the cemetery, and he had made made up all of these comedy characters, and he had recorded them on cassette tape, and like half the service was them just playing some of his old comedy routines so that everybody could hear Dad's comedy routines one more time.
Mm.
And then other ones were very, very serious and lots of tears. And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, like I don't want to sell gravestones forever. But I was like, I really do think that I could be kind of a chaplain and kind of like a freelance religion chaplain of some sort. I'm not Unitarian, but like a university Unitarian, like whatever. If I had to pick one, something like that, because I felt like that was kind of my strong point at that, at that job, was really just like letting people tell me what was on their mind and like, and kind of giving them what they needed at the moment, whether that was a lot or a little. And so I do think that like, if I didn't have theater at all, I don't know that I'd be a pastor or a minister at a church, because that's not really my thing. But I think I could be like, a grievance counselor or some sort of chaplain or a spiritual advisor. And that I think I would do that.
Yeah. Well, Rodney, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun. Learned a lot through this. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And I see, the world at your feet, platter at your feet. There's nothing you can't do.
Oh, I appreciate that. I certainly try all the things.
So I wish you all the best in everything that you got coming up and everything beyond that as well. So thank you again for giving us your time.
Thank you, Tim.
Well, so everybody else listening at home, we thank you for your time as well, whether you're listening to us in the car, at work, or at home. Thank you for giving us just a little bit of time and a little bit of slice into your life as well. If you want to get in touch with us or learn more about us, you can always find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Our website is oklahomaonstage.org. And just look out for us and give us a shout. We love to hear your feedback, oklahomaonstage@gmail.com. So again, thank you for all of your support. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for listening to us. But most importantly, we say it every time, thank you for continuing to support the arts.